So this novel has really good pacing, right? That's one of the things that we have been able to count on this novel for the entire time we've been reading it. But one of the strange things that kind of pops up in novels with really good pacing is that sometimes that pacing is at the expense of the actual storytelling, and there will be chapters here and there that feel kind of just like a way to get us from one place to another. We have to stop here in order to get here, and so we have to fill in the space in between somehow. Now, this chapter doesn't have a whole lot of meat on the bone, but that doesn't mean there aren't things to look at. There's poetry that we're going to quote, which is sort of an incestuous type of cross literary reference. There is a run in with the monster. Nothing important happens there. We're going to wait for that. There is really terrible dialogue, miserable dialogue, a couple bits of really good dialogue, and there are biblical references. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for the 10th chapter, the 10th episode in a chapter by chapter read along of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And this video will have three separate portions: a So What Happened recap of the novel, a literary criticism section where we talk about all of the literary goings on in this chapter itself, and finally, a writer's corner where we talk about some of the notes that we can take from this chapter of Frankenstein to make ourselves better writers. So, what happened? Victor goes on holiday in the mountains, and he is determined to ascend Montanand alone. And he does. He gets to the top. And he's having a good time up there, crossing streams and writing his name in the snow, real bro stuff. Then he tells Mother Nature, "Let me be happy or kill me, yo." Enter the monster. And the monster runs up on Victor. Victor shouts him down. And then they kind of have a rap battle, but neither of them has a mother or any spaghetti, so it goes nowhere fast. Then Victor leaps at the monster and sissy slaps him. Probably. They argue a bit more, and finally the monster says something to the effect of, "You brought me to life. At least hear me out." Victor agrees. We've got quite a few talking points to get through, so we've got to get right into it, starting right away in this chapter with the opening paragraph. I want you to listen to this paragraph and tell me what you think is going on here. "I spent the following day roaming through the valley. I stood beside the sources of the Arveiron, which take their rise in a glacier that with slow pace is advancing down from the summit of the hills to barricade the valley. The abrupt sides of the mountains were before me, the icy wall of the glacier overhung me, a few shattered pines were scattered around, and the solemn silence of this glorious presence chamber of imperial nature was broken only by the brawling waves or the fall of some vast fragment, the thunder of the avalanche, or the cracking reverberated along the mountains of accumulated ice, which, through the silent work of the immutable laws, was ever and anon rent and torn, as if it had been but a plaything in their hands. These sublime and magnificent scenes afforded me the greatest consolation that I was capable of receiving. They elevated me from all littleness of feeling, and although they did not remove my grief, they subdued and tranquilized it." You see what's going on there? Victor has disrupted the natural order. Victor has taken the natural flow of things and reversed it. taking something which had died and giving it fresh life. Here, in the opening of this chapter, after all the drama that has gone on in his life from that moment, he is returning to nature, and it is calming him. The natural order is restoring his humanity, not science, not interference, the natural way of things. And then in the kissing page 2, this in my edition, page 95 in my edition, this is the second paragraph of this chapter here. We have an interesting quote, because there are so many small things in this novel that are biblical, that are possibly references to religion. This is Victor getting ready to climb the mountain, and he is woken by the helpers or something, I guess. We get this quote: "My mule was brought to the door, and I resolved to ascend to the summit of Montenvert. I remembered the effect that the view of the tremendous and ever-moving glacier had produced upon my mind when I first saw it." Now, how common are mules in these situations versus other pack animals? Probably fairly common. Probably that was just kind of the way you did things. I don't think you need to mention it, right? But Mary Shelley does mention it. And I think it is an allusion to the Bible. Zechariah 9:9. So we have here all of these. The monster refers to him later in this chapter by saying, "I should be your Adam." I should be your Adam, referring to Victor as God. Zechariah 9:9. "Your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So the humble pack animal, and this is the way that Jesus entered. Was it Jerusalem or was it Rome that he went to? I'm not a biblical scholar, but one of the places that Jesus arrived, I think it was Jerusalem. He arrived on a mule, on a donkey, on one of these animals. And it was the sign that, so one of the interesting interpretations of the Bible, and Christopher Hitchens talked about it this way. He thought that historically, probably there was a man named Jesus, and that he did these things because one of the things that was so interesting to him is that the writers of the Bible made such a big deal of the fact that Jesus did certain things, and he thought that that was evidence that they had actually happened, because if they hadn't happened, you just wouldn't mention it. If it was someone that you had made up, you wouldn't go through the lengths of saying, "Oh yeah, and this weird little thing transpired." But anyway, that is an interesting quote to me. On the same page, there is this quote from Victor: "I looked on the valley beneath. Vast mists were rising from the rivers which ran through it, and curling in thick wreaths around the opposite mountains, whose summits were hid by the uniform clouds, while rain poured from the dark sky and added to the melancholy impression I received from the objects around me. Alas! Why does man boast of sensibilities superior to those apparent in the brute? It only renders them more necessary beings." A Victor Frankenstein would ironically muse. Why does man feel so superior to lower life forms? It only makes those lower life forms more necessary. And then we have an interesting quote from Mary Shelley here. This is this is the very next line after that quote, but it's as Victor is taking in the scenes and he's sort of hoping for tranquility in his life. He's sort of observing the peacefulness of nature and saying, why can't I have that? If our impulses were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire, we might be nearly free. Now, that doesn't sound too strange. But then we carry on. But now we are moved by every wind that blows, and a chance word or scene that word may convey to us. Well, hold on. Now we are moved by every wind that blows. That sounds like desire. The wind blows, and I want what I'm smelling. The wind blows, and now it's a cloudy overcast, and I want the sun. But Mary Shelley / Victor Frankenstein, Victor wasn't talking about desires. Victor wasn't talking about things you want. So what was he talking about? Well, let's desire. Let's look into that sentence a little more closely. If our impulses were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire, we wouldn't want other things. Victor's talking about the hubba hubba. If our impulses were confined to hunger, we have to eat, thirst, we have to drink, and desire, the desire to procreate. That is what is going on here. Mary Shelley, how very racy. The next thing to talk about here, 96 in this edition, the inset from the poem is actually an inset from this poem. We are as clouds that veil the midnight moon, how restlessly they speed and gleam and quiver, streaking the darkness radiantly, yet soon night closes round and they are lost forever. Or like forgotten lyres, whose dissonant strings give various response to each varying blast, to whose frail frame no second motion brings one mood or modulation like the last. We rest, a dream has power to poison sleep. We rise, one wandering thought pollutes the day. We feel, conceive or reason, laugh or weep, embrace fond woe, or cast our cares away. It is the same, for be it joy or sorrow, the path of its departure still is free. Man's yesterday may never be like his morrow. Naught may endure but mutability. That is a poem from Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley's husband. It was published 2 years before this novel. It was published in 1816, Frankenstein in 1818. So what a way. If you're going to write an all-time banger of a novel, you may as well put some of your hubby's work in that novel to make sure that both of you capture some bit of mortality there. Now, the next thing worth talking about here. This is a very interesting idea in a quote from The Monster. Oh, yeah. The sea, or rather is that right? Hold on, give me one moment. I may have written something wrong. Yeah, I got that wrong. I apologize. This is the monster as they are rap battling. I ought to be thy Adam. Remember, or I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. There's a couple interesting things going on there. Number one, this is the monster casting Victor as God. This is the monster casting himself as man. This is him attempting to humanize himself. But there's also something else going on there. I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Did you catch that? The fallen angel, we are left to assume in reference, is Lucifer. Lucifer was cast out for his own self-interest, for his believing that he was smarter than God, he was better looking than God, he was worthy of his own kingdom, and so he was cast out. Here we have the monster, unless I'm misreading this in some fundamental way, saying, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with valuing knowledge? What's wrong with knowing you're good looking? What's wrong with holding yourself above God? What's wrong with challenging authority? That is what the monster here is saying by claiming the fallen angel had no misdeed. I should be your Adam. Instead, I am, but rather I am the fallen angel, not a fallen angel. I'm not an angel which has fallen. I am the fallen angel. Interesting there. So the final thing worth talking about on a literary basis here, just at a cursory glance, is this. And in another interesting quote along those same lines. This is the monster again. Believe me, Frankenstein, Believe me, Frankenstein, I was benevolent. My soul glowed with love and humanity. But am I not alone, miserably alone? You, my creator, abhor me. What hope can I gather from your fellow creatures who owe me nothing? They spurn and hate me. There is a scene in Fight Club where Tyler Durden is sort of spitting his philosophy towards the narrator. And he says something to the effect of, we are a generation of men who has grown up without fathers. Our father is our image for God. If our father didn't like us, maybe God doesn't like us. That's fine. We don't need him. This is a line very much like that. This is an appeal from the monster saying, look, I just want you to want me. I just want you to identify what it was that you had created. I just want some bit of attention. I just want some guidance, something. I want to know that I am human too. You made me. I am in this form. This form may not look exactly like yours, but this form was imbued with the same life force which yours is. I am a living thing. It is a cry for validation that is very interesting, very humanizing here. This is the first time we really get this type of thing from the monster in this novel. The most interesting thing about tropes or cliches to me is that you know they came from somewhere and you know they keep appearing because they are very useful, or they are a shortcut, or they do something well for the audience. I think we have found the birthplace of a horror film trope that pops up again and again because it works well. There is something, I believe, embedded in our very nature that identifies this and wants to see the big bad appear. In this chapter here, the sea, or rather the vast river of ice, wound among its dependent mountains, whose aerial summits hung over its recesses. Their icy and glittering peaks shone in the sunlight over the clouds. My heart was before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy. I exclaimed, "Wandering spirits, if indeed ye wander, and do not rest in your narrow beds, allow me this faint happiness, or take me, as your companion, away from the joys of life." As I said this, I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance, advancing toward me with superhuman speed. We have the protagonist, the good guy, or at least someone for whom we are supposed to feel empathy, challenging the heavens, challenging nature, challenging sometimes even the big bad, his or herself, and then the big bad appears. This is a trope of the horror genre. This is the earliest text in which I've ever seen this happen. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this was a trope by Mary Shelley's own time, but I think that it works very well here. You see Victor and you want him to have that run in because you, in the back of your mind, know guy's a little bit weaselly, and he deserves some comeuppance. And then we have this on. He approached. His countenance bespoke bitter anguish combined with disdain and malignity, while its unearthly ugliness rendered it almost too horrible for human eyes. But I scarcely observed this. Rage and hatred had deprived me of utterance, and I recovered only to overwhelm him with words expressive of furious detestation and contempt. "Devil," I exclaimed, "do you dare approach me? And do you not fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust, and, oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered." First off, this is unbelievable because we know that Victor is terrified of the monster. Now, maybe he has had some change of character. We haven't seen it on the page. But going from absolute fear to this type of, "Devil, don't do this. Go away. Or I will, my arm wreak the vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head." Second, it's unbelievable because Jesus Christ, that's terrible dialogue. Right? That is so far from realistic that it becomes bad. There's a little bit of something known as ultra truth, especially in dialogue of fiction, meaning that there is a little bit more. Like, you don't want to have people on the page having the conversations that you have in your daily life, working hard or hardly working. You don't want that in your novel. You don't want, how are you? Living the dream. You don't want that in your novel. But neither do you want something that is so alien that we can't have we don't believe anyone has ever said those words, let alone off the tip of their tongue. However, on this same page, we have from the monster this quote: "I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends." That is not believable, but golly is it memorable. That is where the ultra truth lies. It would be very realistic for the monster to tell Victor, "I'm going to kill you and all your friends." But it's not interesting. It would be interesting for the monster to tell Victor, as Victor told the monster, "Do you not fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked upon your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust." That is memorable, but not realistic. This quote from the monster, "I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends," is unrealistic but memorable. So that there's a weird fine line in there where dialogue becomes really good, even if it's not something that you would expect to hear in waiting in line at McDonald's, right? So that is an interesting thing here. The last thing that I have to talk about is this. I haven't read this novel for the first time in a long time now. What I mean to say is there's nothing in this novel that surprises me because I've already been through it. I can't remember the emotions or thoughts that I had so long ago when I first read it. But I ask you, because I think that this is an interesting idea for a writer's corner talking point. How do you feel about the way the monster articulates himself? How do you feel about the monster being so articulate? In sort of the zeitgeist, in the way that the pop culture has sort of enveloped Frankenstein. See, I can't even do it right. Frankenstein's monster, but in pop culture, it is Frankenstein that is the monster. But in the zeitgeist, the pop culture, the monster doesn't speak. The monster is sort of zombie-like. Murr, murr. That is Frankenstein, or the monster, depending on how close you are to those Bela Lugosi type movies. It is, in my opinion, infinitely more interesting that he is articulate. However, what I will say would have added an incredible dimension to this novel is if we saw him growing in his verbosity. If the moment he awakened on that slab in Victor's office, if at that moment he had made noises. I'm pretty sure he was silent there. He was blinking or something like that. Maybe I'm wrong. But if he had been laying there wailing, wailing in pain as he was coming into life, the way that a baby cries, and at some point during one of these brief altercations that Victor had with him, going to Geneva, being locked outside the town. Remember that moment where he sees the monster momentarily in the woods? If he had spoken in broken English then, some type of near phonetic words. And then all of a sudden we get him in this scene where he is rap battling in the mountains, that would have been an incredibly interesting progression. That would have been something that would have made us wonder. It would have humanized the monster because we are seeing him striving and making progress. He would not have been awoken in this final form. I also think, and I don't think this happens in the novel, what if he were slowly tapping into memories? That would be wild as well. Slowly during the course of this novel, the monster is tapping into memories that were still in that brain that has been reanimated inside his head. I think that it's easy to, Monday morning quarterback this sort of thing, especially 200 years after this novel was written. But there are things that I think would make this story a little bit more interesting. And I think that that's always a helpful practice as a reader and a writer, to use your ideas as you are reading the novel. What would I like to see in here? Because that helps you formulate ideas for your own work moving forward.